Are you in business or busyness? Welcome to Standing on Business with Dr. Melissa, the Purpose Profitess. This is a bold, unfiltered journey for entrepreneurs, visionaries, and purpose-driven go-getters who are ready to stop performing and start becoming. Each week, I take you beyond the hustle and into the heart with soul-stirring truths, powerful strategies, and real conversations that uncover what it means to be the CEO of your own life. So, if you're done chasing paper and ready to activate purpose, tune in, tap in, and take your place at the table. This is Standing on Business. And this time, it's personal. Well, hello there, soulmates. It's your girl, Dr. Melissa, back with another soul-stirring episode of Standing on Business, where it's not just business. Y'all, it's personal. So, my loves, today I want to talk to you from a topic that's near and dear to my heart. If I had to give a title to today's discussion, it would be 3 Truths about Grief that can impact how you move forward. And I'm going to tell you, I know I'm in the right room, because when we talk about grief, no one is inoculated or protected from grief in one form or the other. You know, we just live in a world and in a life that is marked by loss of some degree. So today, when I'm talking about grief, I want you to broaden your horizon a little bit, because when I'm speaking about grief, it's not necessarily loss of a person that might result from death, while for many of you that is the case. If that's not your story, I want you to filter it through the whole concept of any type of deep loss: relationships, jobs, health, a number of things. Okay? So, I want to first throw this out at you. Grief has a reputation. When you hear the word grief, right? When someone says grief, it has a reputation that is inherently negative. So when we think of grief, we generally think of something that happens after loss. We think about grief as something that happens after the funeral, after the goodbye, after the moment that everyone leaves and, gives their condolences and they're gone. And I want you to hone in on that word after. We believe that grief occurs after the loss. But today, I want to submit to you that there is a kind of grief that can begin long before anyone says, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And many of you know that kind of grief intimately. Like it wasn't ushered in after a loss or after people acknowledged that there was a loss. Many of you know that grief intimately because you've been grieving while still showing up. You've been grieving while still being responsible. Y'all, you've been grieving while still married, still employed, still needed. So, today's discussion is really for anyone who has learned to live while losing. So when I say the word grief throughout our discussion and our time together today, I want you to exchange grief with the word loss. And I think that will really help you to buy into this concept that I'm going to talk about with respect to grieving even when there hasn't been an external marker that something is gone. So, today we're going to talk about 3 truths about grief that can impact or change how you live forward. Now, I want you to understand this is not how you get over it. This is not about how to rush through it, but this is really about how you can carry grief with wisdom. So, if you've ever felt like your grief didn't fit into the neat timelines or public expectations, and I can promise y'all that's been my story. I want you to stay with me and rock with me as we walk through these truths and get to a place on the other side where we understand that it is possible to grow and grieve at the same time. So let me tell you, for 2 years, I lived with something that I now understand was anticipatory grief. And I know that's a word that may sound baffling, but if you walk with me, hopefully I can unpack what anticipatory grief is. Now, my husband, my late husband, was still alive, but he was not the man I had known due to his stage 4 brain cancer diagnosis. Because I'm going to tell you the dreaded thing about brain cancer is that it doesn't just take the life. It doesn't just take the body. Brain cancer changes the mind in some cases. Brain cancer changes the personality in some cases. Brain cancer changes the relationship in our case. So every day for 2 years, I was having to learn how to live without him while still being married to him. And I'm going to tell you, that kind of grief is confusing. It's like you're grieving someone who's still breathing, someone who's still present, someone who's still physically there, but emotionally gone, emotionally unrecognizable. And the term that I used during that time that helped me to sort of make it make sense in some small degree was that I lost him before I lost him. You see, when his personality started to shift, and I want to say this was probably late 2019. He had been diagnosed in 2018. So his personality started to shift in late 2019 and early 2020. There were moments of clarity. There were moments when I caught glimpses of who he used to be. And I tell y'all, I would treasure those moments. I would just grab them and hold on to them so tight because I knew that they were temporary, because I could see the shifting and the changing into someone that I didn't know. And then sadly, in 2020, early 2020, those moments where he had clarity completely disappeared. They were gone. And in that time, my protector for 31 years became my greatest adversary. And y'all, I found myself fighting him to protect him from him. I was fighting him to protect him from him. It was a tough time for our family. And I'll tell you, when he finally passed in 2022, something unexpected happened. Alongside the pain of losing someone that you have spent more than half your life with. But remember, I had been able to rehearse the loss with the anticipatory grief because I actually lost him in 2020. So by 2022, I had been 2 years learning how to live without him. But what I found was that alongside the grief and alongside the pain, there was peace. Sounds crazy, right? There was actually a peace. There was peace that his suffering had ended. There was peace that this long, brutal battle was over. There was peace that 2 months before he passed away, he remembered who he was and came back to us. There was peace that I was blessed to be there and hold his hand until the very end. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I think back on that time, I can remember feeling guilty for that peace. I felt like feeling peace was wrong. Like there was so much pain, but I couldn't explain why I had this peace until I realized something very important. And it's going to lead me to my first truth. And that is grief can begin before loss. And that matters. This first truth about grief is that grief doesn't always start with death. Sometimes grief begins with change. It begins with decline. Like when someone gets such a dreadful diagnosis as what happened in our case, there was enormous change. Our lives, our day-to-day lives shifted and changed. How I woke up in the morning, my day-to-day changed. I shifted from being a CEO of a company to being a full-time caretaker. I shifted from being someone who felt protected to someone who had to stay in complete protection and protector mode. Everything changes. So that grief starts with the change, with the loss of recognition. That grief can start with watching someone disappear in slow motion. And I know there are many of you out there, if you've dealt with this, particularly, let's talk about it in a physical sense with someone who you've lost, especially if they were sick. Over time, you're in grief mode before anyone ever says, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." Because you are losing your understanding, your experience of who that person is in real time, slowly but surely. So let's understand that grieving happens before the loss. And I want you to understand that when that happens, you don't just grieve the person. You don't just grieve the relationship that you lost. You don't just grieve the job that you were on for 30 years and they laid you off. Here's the big thing. You grieve the future that you had imagined. That's where the grief comes from. What you had planned, the loss of the plan, the loss of the future, right? And here's the thing. If you don't acknowledge that kind of grief, it just stays lodged in your body. Like it's there. And because you don't acknowledge that it is grief, you're not able to process it. You're not able to hold space for it, right? How many of you out there have been grieving relationships that you lost, so divorce? How many of you have been grieving roles? I recently went through the grief of my roles as a mother, becoming a mother to all adult children, which means I lost the role of mommy. I shifted into something different. How many of you have had that same thing? How many of you are grieving the loss of seasons of your life? Maybe versions of your life that ended quietly without ceremony. Like nobody gave you a party a retirement party. Nobody gave you um, a dinner to allow you to say goodbye to this particular season of your life or this particular role. Y'all, it's as deep as, for me, and a lot of my women out there will understand, just getting to this age. There's a loss of a season of my life that was marked by different things as I was younger. You get older and then you deal with menopause and all of that, and you start to realize that you've shifted into something else. There's a whole entire season of your life that you're having to say goodbye to without ceremony. And oftentimes without the language or the almost the permission to grieve it, right? And so if you find yourself in that situation and you wonder why you're feeling so heavy, sis or my brother, I'm going to tell you it's because your grief has never been named. Like you haven't named it as grief. And I want you to understand that naming grief doesn't weaken you. What it really does is it validates your experience. It then gives you permission to say, yeah, that happened to me and that hurt. And I have the right to give myself grace and sit with that for a moment. But you've got to first acknowledge that's what it is. Okay, so our second truth that changed everything about me and my understanding of grief is that gratitude and grief can coexist. Whew. When I learned that, everything changed. Everything changed. When I understood that gratitude and grief are not opposites. Y'all, they can live in the same breath. I was grateful when I think about the 31 years, the 3 decades that I shared with my late husband. I was grateful for the years that we had. Grateful for those moments, those few moments of clarity that he experienced during that really hard time of decline. Grateful that his suffering had ended. But at the same time, I was also heartbroken for what he'd missed. I was heartbroken for the grandchildren that he would meet. I was heartbroken for the milestones that he would never see. And here's the thing, holding both of those things doesn't make me a confused person. It made me honest. And I would submit to you that some of you have been harshly judging yourselves because you feel relief alongside the sorrow. But please, let me free you from that judgment. Relief doesn't mean that you loved less. Peace doesn't mean that you're detached. It simply means that you've endured long enough to welcome rest. And that your Creator, in your endurance of the suffering, of the difficult times, loved you enough to welcome you into a period of rest and peace. I'll tell you, this duality of holding gratitude and grief, it is really something that I help people process often in my She Rose program. That program is specifically geared toward people who have experienced loss and grief, loss of a person, loss of an identity, loss of a job, loss of a relationship, whatever. I'm able to help them process that because what many of us are taught, we're taught to feel one emotion at a time. And we feel like something is wrong if we're feeling multiple emotions. And we'll say, no, either I'm sad or I'm relieved. Either I'm grieving or I'm grateful. Like I can't be both. But I want you to understand that healing is not linear. Healing, real healing, is layered. So let me just take a woosah, pause for a moment, acknowledge that this is a heavy topic. I want to say something to you, and I want you to hear this clearly. If any part of this is resonating with you, I want you to hear me when I say you're not grieving wrong. And I don't even know what that means because I don't know that anybody has a pattern on how we're supposed to grieve. But unfortunately, there are people out there that ascribe their way of grieving to everybody. Oh, you didn't cry enough. Oh, you didn't wait long enough. Oh, you said this instead of that. Oh, you got makeup on and you're out shopping. I would think you would be at home like prostrate on the floor. Nobody has the pattern on how we need to grieve. It is as individual as our fingerprints. And you don't have to prove anything to anybody. So I want you to hear me when I say you're not grieving wrong. Allow your grieving to be honest. Because I'm going to tell you it's honesty. And it's that honesty that will allow your grief to soften. Not disappear, but to soften. And this is where I want to honor and celebrate you today. I don't want to celebrate you because you're strong. Because if you remember, I talked before about strength being a mask sometimes. It was a mask that I wore daily. So I'm not here to celebrate how strong you are. I'm here to celebrate that you're still open. How do I know? Because you're right here. You're right here with me, walking through this discussion and allowing yourself to embrace a notion that may feel foreign at first, but I'm telling you, it is foundational. So let's move on with the third truth. The third truth about grief is this: you don't move on from grief. Let me say that for the people in the back. People have said to me, Dr. Melissa, help me to move on from this grief. And what I say to them is, you don't move on from grief. You move with it. You see, grief is not a dirty word. Grief is evidence that there was love. If there's no grief, I don't know how you make the case that there was connection or love. So we don't move on from grief. We move with it because grief then becomes a part of how you love. Grief has become a part of how I see things. Grief becomes a part of how you choose. You see, grief reshapes you, not by shrinking you, but by deepening you. I promise you. When I wrote the book, it was necessary. It was from this very premise that my grief was not a wasted part of my experience. My grief was necessary for shaping me into a woman that can show up unapologetically. It was for the grief. It was because of the grief, not in spite of the grief. And I'll tell you that when I learned to allow my grief to integrate instead of dominate, something shifted. When I allow grief to integrate instead of dominate, y'all, I was able to give myself permission to love and to be loved again. When I allowed my grief to integrate instead of dominate, I was able to heal enough to understand that my dash, that dash between your birth year and your death year, 1970 dash, my dash was incomplete. In 2022, there was no completion of my dash. So once I realized that my dash was incomplete and that I needed to honor my dash, that I needed to respect the fact that God had given me this calling and this impact to make on the world, and that I was responsible for that. I wasn't responsible for my late husband's dash. I'm not responsible for my children's dash. I'm not responsible for my husband's dash. I'm responsible for the race that I was given to run until my dash runs into that date, which will represent my completion. And I'll tell you, when I realized that, family, that required me to be bold and brave enough to heal. I stopped measuring my healing by how little I felt. When I would think about my healing, I didn't have a conversation. I didn't consider my feelings because feelings are malleable. I started measuring my healing by how fully I was willing to live. If you're navigating grief in a way that does not look like someone else's, first of all, I'm going to tell you, just stop even comparing it. Stop consulting anything outside of you as to how it's supposed to look. This journey is ours alone, it's individual. And you have the right to walk through this journey in a way that feels true for you. Okay? That's what I want you to understand. I'll say it again, you guys. It is possible to grieve and to grow all at the same time. So, here's my question for you. What part of your grief needs permission to exist without explanation? Sit with that. Sit with that. And if this resonates with you, I want you to just take the time, give yourself the grace to process that. Are you needing permission? Are you feeling the need to explain? I promise you, I know I did. Particularly with me, of course, I was bold and audacious and, y'all, disrespectful to people enough to get married again. I know. Just I don't even know. I don't know what's wrong with me. But the pressure during that time to explain myself, to explain that while my husband passed away in 2022, I lost my husband in 2020, to explain the 31 years that I had devoted to my life, my late husband, my children. I mean, against anything else that I wanted or my purpose was irrelevant. I got married when I was 21 years old and I had spent my life, all of that. I felt the pressure to explain to people who weren't there in my struggle. Not one person that was asking me to explain or who felt like I needed to get permission from them to keep living my dash that God gave me. Not one of them was there in the grueling process of our struggles. Not one. So you don't need permission from people. And I want you to examine what part of your grief, whatever it is, doesn't have to be the loss of a person, that job that you lost, that relationship that you walked away from, that people said, oh my gosh, honey, he was such a good man. I mean, really? Like, you got divorced? These people that are talking, inserting themselves into your story without really having a clue, that ends today. So here's the mantra I want you to sit with when we talk about grief. Because sometimes we don't want to call it grief because we are afraid that grief sounds like weakness. We don't want to say, I'm grieving that relationship. I'm grieving that job. I'm grieving the fact that I'm no longer able to do this or that because physically I'm older. I'm grieving the fact that my children have their own lives, whatever it is. We don't want to say grief because grief to us sometimes can sound like weakness. And it can almost sound like, well, that's a big word. And what I'm going through, I can't call it grief. Grieving is when somebody has this tremendous tragedy or this big loss. No, grief is a byproduct of loss of any kind. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do an aside. Maybe 2 months ago, I lost my dog, y'all. Whew. And I'd had her for 15 years, Kenya. Um, and that was my friend. That was my friend for a long time. Going through stuff, she'd be right there. And I got to stop because I'll tear up talking about her now. I lost her. That grief, there are some people, believe it or not, that cannot understand that kind of grief for an animal. I'm sorry if you can't understand that. My goodness, I'll pray for you. Um, but that loss, she couldn't talk. She didn't pay any bills. She couldn't buy me roses. As a matter of fact, I was the one doing all the paying and buying. But what she gave me and what I lost, since she's no longer here, is more powerful than almost anything I can imagine. It was pure love and friendship and adoration. I walk in the room and Kenya makes me feel like I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So I want you to understand that you can call it grief. It doesn't have to be a death. You can call it grief. If you've lost something that meant something to you, you can give it that language. And here's the mantra: grief is not weakness, it's love continuing in a new form. Let me say that again. Grief is not weakness, it's love continuing in another form. So, if our discussion and our time today has resonated with you at all, please leave a comment and tell me which of the three truths spoke the most to you. And then for those of you who want to DM me privately, please do so. If you want to talk privately about your grief journey, I would love to hear about it and I would love to support you to the degree that I can with that. And I'll tell you, when I ask you to reach out or DM, no promise of fixing. I'm not Jesus Jr., so I'm not here to fix you because you're actually not broke. I'm not here to give you timelines because, again, your journey is as unique as you are. What I can offer is presence, honesty, and the permission to keep living. Okay, so I want to thank you so much for tuning in to Standing on Business with Dr. Melissa. I hope that our discussion today has ignited a fire within you to embrace your authenticity, prioritize your purpose, and become the CEO of your own life. And listen, you don't have to walk this out alone. I have built a space for women and a few good men just like you. A space for women who are ready to move in faith, even while they're still figuring it out. And that space is called Women with Purpose, Power, and Profits. This is my free Facebook community where you're going to find strategy and encouragement. It's a place where women come to be sharpened, supported, and seen. Inside there, we'll talk about purpose and profits and power, not as buzzwords, but as a blueprint. So just search Women with Purpose, Power, and Profits on Facebook, or you can use the link that will be in the show notes. I can't wait to see you there. And of course, if you want more information about me, please visit my website, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then follow me on all the socials. So join me next time when we'll dive deeper into the strategies and mindset shifts needed to build a purpose-driven life. I need you to remember that you are purposeful and you are powerful. I believe in you, and I cannot wait to see and hear about the incredible things that you're going to achieve. So, until next time, keep standing up, keep standing out, and keep standing on business. Bye for now.